Imagine pouring 12 years of your life into building a company, only to be fired by a new CEO, just weeks after the company is acquired. That was the reality I faced. I had helped turn Red Forge Technologies from a struggling startup into an industry leader, only to be told that my work no longer aligned with their new vision. But this wasn't the end of my story. Stay tuned to hear how betrayal led to something bigger than I ever imagined. If you're curious about what happens next, hit subscribe and join me on this journey. As the call ended, I sat there in silence, staring at the screen. Caroline's words echoed in my mind like a cruel punch to the gut. "Your role doesn't align with our corporate structure," she had said, as if 12 years of sweat, sacrifice, and sleepless nights meant nothing. She spoke with the detached professionalism of someone who had never truly understood the blood, the tears, the heart of the company that I had helped build. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of the news settle into my chest. I should have been angry. I should have shouted, demanded answers, but instead I felt numb. A part of me knew this day might come. We'd been acquired by Triumph Energy, a corporate giant, and everything was changing. But I had never expected it to happen so quickly, so coldly. I had built systems that transformed Red Forge Technologies into a respected name in the energy sector. I'd led teams through the toughest moments, made the impossible possible, and always believed that loyalty to the company would mean something. Now it meant nothing. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I simply asked about the transition process, making sure I stayed professional to the very end. "I'll send you the necessary documents," Caroline said before the call ended. The moment she hung up, a deep sense of disbelief washed over me. 12 years and gone in 7 minutes. But what truly hurt wasn't the loss of my job. It was the realization that the company I had helped build was now just another cog in a massive, soulless machine. Red Forge had always been more than just a company to me. It was my life. The long nights spent working alongside brilliant engineers, the exhilarating moments when we launched new systems that changed the game, the countless hours spent solving problems that seemed insurmountable at the time. I had poured my heart and soul into it. Now, it was being dismantled. I knew it, even before the acquisition. The executives at Triumph weren't interested in innovation. They were interested in numbers, quarterly numbers. They didn't care about the long-term vision, the culture, the relationships we had with our clients. They only cared about cost-cutting and maximizing short-term profits. I had seen the signs, but I had hoped, no, I had believed, that things would be different. I opened my laptop and stared at the screen. The legal documents from the severance package were staring back at me, but I couldn't focus on them. Instead, I opened a new window and began to scroll through the emails from my former colleagues. Jason, the lead system architect, had messaged me, as had several other engineers. They had already seen what I was seeing. Triumph's leadership was gutting the very innovation that had made us stand out. Jason's message was simple. "You were right about the new management. They're wrecking everything. You still thinking about that project we talked about?" My phone buzzed again with another message. And another, and another. They were all saying the same thing. Triumph didn't get it. They didn't understand what Red Forge was really about, and I wasn't. The only one who noticed. The people I had mentored, the ones who had looked to me for guidance, were now asking, "What's next?" The people who had worked alongside me for years, the ones who had helped me build this company from the ground up, were now asking me to lead them again. But I couldn't give them an answer yet. Not until I was ready. I had always been the one who solved problems, who had the plan, who always knew what to do next. But now I was facing the biggest problem of my life. I had been loyal. Too loyal, perhaps. I had spent so many years focusing on the company's success that I had sacrificed everything else. My health, my marriage, my family. My ex-wife had said it in our final argument. "You're married to that company." She wasn't wrong. I had put Red Forge above everything, including the people who mattered most. I had been blind to the fact that Red Forge wasn't my company anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. But now I was faced with a new reality. Triumph was going to change everything, and that meant I had to change too. I spent the next few days holed up in my home office, surrounded by stacks of documents, blueprints, and business plans. As I dug deeper into my contract, I realized something. There were loopholes, big ones. Triumph's legal team had been sloppy. They had assumed I wouldn't notice, that I wouldn't have the resources to fight back. But they were wrong. The more I thought about it, the more I knew what had to be done. I would build something better, something that wouldn't be suffocated by corporate greed and short-sightedness. I began to lay the groundwork for a new company, Pinnacle Dynamics, a company that would take everything I had learned at Red Forge and build on it, but without the corporate shackles. I knew I couldn't do this alone. So I reached out to the engineers who had worked with me at Red Forge, the best of the best, the ones who were also being left behind. Jason was the first to respond. "I'm in," he said. "Let's do this." That was all I needed to hear. Pinnacle Dynamics was born in that moment. I started drawing up a business plan. I didn't know exactly how we would do it yet, but I knew that we were going to do it right. What started as a contingency plan, a way to prepare for the worst, was now becoming my mission. And as I sat there, piecing together the foundation of something that could change the world, I realized that this was no longer about revenge. It wasn't about getting back at Triumph for firing me. It was about building something that would stand for the values I had spent so many years fighting for: innovation, integrity, and client-centered solutions. I wasn't done yet. The story was just beginning, and it was going to be far more powerful than I ever imagined. It was a quiet evening when the phone call came. My neighbor Greg knocked on my door, his face creased with concern. Greg had always been the quiet, easygoing type, a man who kept to himself and watched from a distance. But tonight, something was different. There was tension in the air, something unspoken that hung heavily between us. "Dustin," Greg said, his voice unusually low. I've been hearing things about the company, about you too." I raised an eyebrow, unsure of what he meant, but the look on his face told me I wasn't going to like what was coming. He had always been the one to keep tabs on the neighborhood, and I had never thought much of it. His observations were always harmless, just small talk over the fence about the weather or the latest news. But tonight, the weight of his words felt different. "What do you mean, Greg?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but a knot began to form in my stomach. "Look, I know you've been through a lot recently. We all heard about Red Forge's acquisition," he said, glancing around like he was worried someone might overhear. "But it's more than that, Dustin. People are talking about what's going on in that building across town, the one with the new signs, Pinnacle Dynamics." His eyes narrowed as he added, "I know what you're doing, and I'm telling you, this won't end well." I felt the weight of his words hit me like a punch in the gut. Greg wasn't just a neighbor. He was a former detective, someone who'd seen the darker side of life. His instincts were sharper than anyone I knew, and right now, they were telling him something I was still trying to ignore. "You don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to stay calm, but a sense of defensiveness crept into my voice. "It's just business, Greg. I'm moving on. I'm doing what I need to do to survive." Greg didn't flinch. Instead, he took a step closer, lowering his voice even more. "Survive? Is that really all this is about? I've watched you. Dustin, I know how hard you've worked, how much you gave up, but you're playing with fire now. You've got nothing to lose, but what about the people who are working with you? What happens when Triumph catches wind of what you're doing?" I tried to brush him off, but I could see the worry etched on his face. I knew Greg better than most. He wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, especially not when it came to something that involved a career he'd worked so hard for. But there it was. His concern wasn't just for me. It was for Pinnacle Dynamics, for the team I was building, and it was the last thing I wanted to hear. "You think I'm not aware of the risks?" I shot back. Greg, this isn't just about... This is about what's right. Red Forge was a great company, but it was dying under Triumph's leadership. They didn't care about the work, they cared about the profits. The same people who laid me off are the same people who will destroy everything I've spent years building. They'll do the same to the engineers who helped me create this, to the clients who trusted us. Greg looked at me, his face softening. I get it, Dustin, I do. But I also know the game. You're up against a corporate giant. Triumph's not going to play fair. They'll use every tool at their disposal to take you down. They'll ruin you, your team, and anyone who dares to challenge them. His words hit harder than I expected. I thought I had prepared myself for the inevitable fight against Triumph. But hearing it from someone who had seen how the system worked, how these companies played dirty, made me realize the depth of the battle I was stepping into. I've got no choice, Greg, I said, my voice quiet now, almost resigned. This is bigger than just revenge. It's about creating something that actually works, something that's built on the right values, not corporate greed. These people are pushing innovation aside to chase short-term profits, and they don't even realize what they're losing in the process. Greg leaned against the door frame, his gaze lingering on me as if trying to make sense of it all. But don't think they won't come after you, and they'll come hard. They've got the money, the resources, and the power to crush you. You've been in this game long enough to know that. I didn't have a response for him. I had heard everything he said, and I understood the gravity of the situation. But there was something inside me, something that refused to back down. It wasn't about the fight anymore. It was about doing what was right, about proving that innovation could still thrive, that there was still room for something better than the corporate machines Triumph represented. I know the risks, Greg, I said, my voice steady now, but it's my fight to make. And if I lose, I lose, but if I win, everything changes. There was a long silence between us. Greg didn't say anything more, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. He was still worried, still not entirely, convinced that I understood the full extent of what I was up against. And he had every reason to be concerned. Triumph was a force to be reckoned with, and I was nothing more than a small startup trying to challenge them. But in that moment, I realized that what I was doing wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the people who had trusted me, about the engineers who believed in this vision, who were willing to take the leap with me. As Greg finally turned to leave, he gave me one last look. "Just be careful, Dustin," he said, his voice quiet but filled with a sense of finality. "You're walking a dangerous path, and when the storm hits, don't say I didn't warn you." I watched him walk away, the weight of his words heavy in the air. He was right in many ways. But what Greg didn't know was that I wasn't afraid of the storm. I had been through worse before, and if Triumph wanted a war, they would get one. But this time it wasn't just about survival. This time it was about building something better, a legacy that would outlive the corporate giants. Something that would stand for the future, no matter how much they tried to tear it down. I looked out the window, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. The fight was just beginning. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. The decision had been made. I was going to build Pinnacle Dynamics, and I wasn't going to waste any more time. But even as the excitement of this new venture surged through me, there was a creeping feeling of doubt in the back of my mind. Was I ready for this? Could I really pull this off? I'd just been fired from the company I helped build. Triumph had all the power, all the resources, and yet I was about to challenge them. It wasn't just the company I was up against. It was the system itself. Every corner I turned seemed to present a new obstacle, a new challenge. The biggest of all, the non-compete clause that Triumph had tied me up with. I knew it was flimsy. I had been meticulous in reviewing the details, but still the legal threats felt like a shadow hanging over me. One misstep, one wrong move, and everything I was building could come crashing down before it had even really begun. I had gathered the best minds at Red Forge, the engineers who saw the same flaws I saw in Triumph's approach. They were hungry, for something better. But we were all walking on a razor's edge. Every move we made had to be calculated. Every word we spoke was a potential risk. One mistake and it could be over before it even started. But in that first week, everything felt like it was falling into place. The small office space I had secured was buzzing with energy. We were a small team, but we were driven. We had no other option. And the work, the planning, the strategizing, this was the fire I had been missing. It felt real, like we were actually going to change something. But the stakes were high, and that tension was always present. I couldn't escape. The feeling that someone was watching me. Every call I made, every email I sent, I kept expecting a knock on my door, or a phone call from Triumph's legal team, but none came. Not yet. The breakthrough came late one night. I had just finished reviewing the business plan for Pinnacle. Dynamics when my phone buzzed. It was Jason, the lead system architect. I hadn't heard from him in a while, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "Dustin, we need to talk," his text read. I stared at the screen for a moment, my heart skipping a beat. Jason had always been the level-headed one, the one who kept his emotions in check. But tonight there was an urgency in his message that I couldn't ignore. I called him back immediately. "Dustin." Jason's voice was tight, barely controlled. "I just came from the office. You're not going to believe this." "What happened?" I asked, a lump forming in my throat. "I don't know how to say this, but I think Triumph is already planning to move against us," Jason said, his voice shaking. "I've been getting calls from people I don't even know. They're asking questions about Pinnacle. They're trying to find out who's involved. And it's not just lawyers, Dustin. There's someone higher up pulling the strings." My stomach dropped. It was happening faster than I had imagined. Triumph wasn't just going to sit back and let us build this company without a fight. They had already started making their move, and I was the target. "We need to be careful," Jason continued. "I've got people who've worked with Triumph in the past. They've told me that the legal team is already compiling everything they can find on us. It's only a matter of time before they try to shut us down." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "What do you think we should do?" I asked. "We need to stay low, and we need to move fast," Jason replied. "We've got to secure the technology we're building before they can steal it or sabotage it." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. I knew he was right. We were building something groundbreaking, something that could put Pinnacle on the map. But the risk of Triumph shutting us down, of them finding a way to wipe out everything we were working for, was very real. Glanced at the clock on the wall. It was already past midnight. The game had changed. I had been expecting a battle, but this was something else. Triumph wasn't just fighting to win. They were fighting to crush us, to erase us before we could even take off. I ran my fingers through my hair, thinking quickly. If Triumph wanted to play dirty, we were going to have to be smarter. We couldn't just play by the rules. They had all the power. But we had something they didn't: the truth. We had the solutions they couldn't deliver, and that gave us an edge. "I'll handle the legal side," I said to Jason, my voice firm. "We'll find the cracks in their system, the holes in their non-compete. But we need to move fast. We're going to get ahead of this before they can stop us," Jason agreed, but I could hear the tension in his voice. "I'll do whatever it takes, but we can't underestimate how far they'll go. This isn't just a business deal anymore, Dustin. This is personal." I hung up the phone, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Jason was right. Triumph wasn't just after our technology. They were after us, the people who dared to challenge their monopoly, who dared to believe that innovation could still thrive outside their corporate walls. But there was no turning back now. The next morning, the team gathered for our first major meeting. Everyone was there: Jason, the engineers, and a few other key players who had jumped on board. We needed to come up with a clear strategy to keep Pinnacle under wraps, to stay one step ahead of Triumph. As we discussed our next moves, I could feel the tension growing in the room. Everyone was nervous, but there was a fire in their eyes. They were ready to fight for this just as much as I was. Jason broke the silence. "We can't wait for them to come to us. We need to make the first move. We need to show them that we're not just some small startup. They can't just crush us like they think. I nodded, feeling the weight of the decision I was about to make. We're going to get our product in front of our first major client, I said, my voice steady but filled with determination. We're going to prove that we can deliver, that we have what they need, and we'll do it faster than Triumph can react. The team agreed, and we set to work. We knew that if we could secure just one major client, it would give us the credibility we needed. But even as we worked, there was an unease in the air, a sense of waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then, just as we were about to finalize our first major contract with Meridian Energy, a new challenge emerged. Triumph Energy's legal team sent us a cease and desist letter, claiming that Pinnacle was infringing on their intellectual property. The battle for survival had just escalated to a whole new level. We were being cornered from every direction. Stared at the letter in disbelief, the weight of what was happening sinking in. The legal threats were just the beginning. Triumph wasn't going to let us succeed without a fight. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to back down. I had already lost everything once, and I wasn't about to let that happen again. We were going to win, no matter what it took. The final days of our battle with Triumph Energy came faster than I had anticipated. We had fought tooth and nail for every inch, dodging legal threats, managing our team under immense pressure, and working around the clock to ensure Pinnacle dynamics stayed afloat. But through it all, one thing kept me going: our vision. I wasn't just building a company. I was fighting for something far greater than any contract or financial gain. As the weeks passed, the cracks in Triumph's foundation began to show. The technical failures, the missed deadlines, the overwhelmed clients. It was all falling apart, just like we had predicted. Every time Triumph tried to bury us under a mountain of legal threats, we found a way to rise above. They couldn't erase the truth. And the truth was simple. Pinnacle Dynamics had the solutions they couldn't deliver. We had built something real, something that mattered. It was the day of the Meridian Energy contract signing that everything came to a head. After months of careful planning, we had secured the deal that would establish Pinnacle as a formidable force in the energy sector. Meridian, once a loyal client of Red Forge, was ready to make the leap to Pinnacle's new platform. The meeting was tense, but there was a quiet confidence in the room. Meridian's operations director, Anthony, had worked closely with us to customize the system to fit their unique needs, and when the contract was signed, it felt like the culmination of everything we had worked for. But as the ink dried on that document, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. The weight that had been pressing down on me for months, the pressure to prove myself, to prove that what we were building could succeed, finally lifted. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were thriving. We were no longer the underdogs. Pinnacle was a force to be reckoned with. Yet it wasn't just the business success that had changed me. It was the personal transformation. I had spent years at Red Forge, pouring myself into a company that I thought would always value me. When it didn't, I realized something crucial. Loyalty to a company doesn't always mean loyalty from the company. It was a painful lesson, one that took me down a path I never expected. But in the end, it had led me here, to something better, to a company built on the values that mattered to me: integrity, innovation, and client-first solutions. As Pinnacle grew, so did my team. The engineers who had stood by me, who had believed in the vision from the beginning, were now thriving in an environment where their ideas were valued. The culture we had built was everything Red Forge could have been, had it not been suffocated by corporate greed. And that realization, that we had created something that was truly ours, was worth more than any paycheck or contract. But the story didn't end with Meridian's contract. The fight against Triumph had only intensified as the company tried to come after us legally. They threatened our new clients, tried to invalidate our work, and pushed every legal boundary they could. But it was too late. Pinnacle had found its footing. We were no longer just fighting for survival. We were fighting for the future of innovation in an industry that had long been controlled by giants. It was in a quiet meeting, a year after Pinnacle's founding, that I finally felt the full weight of what we had accomplished. Harold Thompson, the founder of Red Forge, came to visit our office. At 72, Harold had slowed down, but his sharp mind was still as brilliant as ever. He walked through the office, stopping to chat with the engineers, offering guidance, but most of all, pride. "Dustin," he said, looking at me with a smile, "you built something better than we ever could have. I never thought I'd see the day when I'd walk into a company like this again. But you did it. You took everything we worked for, everything we believed in, and you made it something real." That moment felt like a full circle. Harold had been my mentor, the person who had given me my start. He had trusted me when Red Forge was just an idea, and now he was watching Pinnacle grow into something even bigger. It was at that moment that I realized just how far I had come. The fire inside me, the drive to build something real, something lasting, hadn't just been a fight against a triumph. It had been a fight to find myself, to prove that no matter how many times you get knocked down, if you keep pushing forward, you can rebuild. You can rise from the ashes of betrayal and failure, and create something that will stand the test of time. As I sat in that meeting with Harold, looking at the vibrant team we had built, I couldn't help but smile. Pinnacle wasn't just a company. It was a testament to everything I had learned the hard way. It was about values, about standing up for what was right, and about refusing to let corporate greed and short-term thinking dictate the future. And in the end, it wasn't about defeating, triumph, or proving anyone wrong. It was about building something that would last, something that would matter. And that was the victory I had been fighting for all along. As I looked around the room, I saw the faces of the engineers who had been with me from the beginning. They weren't just colleagues anymore. They were partners. Partners who had believed in me, who had trusted me when it all seemed impossible. And together we had built something better. So as I stood there in the very office where we had started from nothing, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The journey had been hard, and there were moments when I didn't know if we would make it. But we did. And in the end, I realized that sometimes the greatest victories don't come from winning against others. They come from winning for yourself. Pinnacle Dynamics was more than just a company. It was my redemption. And as I watched my team celebrate, I knew that we had only just begun. The best was yet to come.